There is a particular kind of exhaustion that does not come from working too hard or sleeping too little. It is the exhaustion of feeling everything, of waking in the morning already braced for what the day might bring, of carrying the weight of a conversation that happened 3 days ago still folded somewhere inside your chest, of lying in the quiet after everyone else has gone to sleep and finding that the quiet is not quiet at all. It is full of replayed moments, reconsidered words, small wounds that should have closed by now but somehow have not. If you've known this kind of tired, then you are exactly where you are meant to be. Welcome to Nothing Has Power Over You Anymore, published by Unchained Heart. In these pages, we go beyond the surface of emotional reactivity and sensitivity, inviting you to sit with what it truly means to live in a body and a mind that absorbs everything, and to begin, gently and without force, to find your way back to a self that cannot be so easily reached. Perhaps you have noticed that you can walk into a room and feel the atmosphere before a single word has been spoken. You sense the tension in someone's shoulders, the clipped edge of a greeting that was slightly too short, the way a silence lasts just a beat longer than it should. And without choosing to, without wanting to, your nervous system has already begun its calculations. What did I do? Is something wrong? Is it me? The body answers before the mind has even formed the question. This is not weakness. This is not a flaw in your character. It is, in many ways, a sign of how attuned you have become, but attunement that has never been balanced by protection becomes a form of suffering. You feel the world at full volume. You always have, and perhaps the people in your life have named it things. Too sensitive, too intense. You take everything so personally. You need to toughen up. Perhaps you even began to believe them, began to carry those words the way you carry everything else, deep inside where no one can see. Perhaps you have spent years trying to manage this, trying to be less, trying to build a version of yourself that does not feel quite so much, that does not carry quite so far. And perhaps you have found that none of it worked, because what you were taught to do was suppress, not heal, cover, not understand. And covered things do not stay covered. They simply find other ways to surface. In today's audiobook, we explore emotional reactivity and the exhausting pattern of absorbing everything around you, the heart of nothing. Has Power Over You Anymore? Published by Unchained Heart. In these pages, we go beyond the surface, inviting you to sit with what this theme truly means in your own life. Before we begin, if something in these words has already found its way into you, I want to gently invite you to follow the Unchained Heart channel. There is something here that is made for exactly who you are, and I want you to be able to find your way back whenever you need it. We will move through 6 chapters together. In the first, we will sit with the origins of this sensitivity, where it was born, and why it made perfect sense at the time. In the second, we will look at how that sensitivity quietly shaped the architecture of who you became. In the third, we will explore the patterns it created in your relationships, the ones you could not quite name but always felt. In the fourth, we will turn our attention to the body itself, to what it has been holding that the mind never processed. In the fifth, we will begin the slow and honest work of unchaining, not by becoming hard, but by becoming rooted. And in the sixth, we will rest for a moment in the question of what life might feel like when nothing on the outside has the power to reach all the way inside. Let us begin, gently, at the root of this. Chapter 1. The child who learned to read the room there is a moment, somewhere in early childhood, when a person learns that the emotional weather of the people around them matters more than their own. It is not a lesson that is announced. No one sits a small child down and says, "Your feelings are secondary." It happens much more quietly than that. It happens in the pause before a parent's face shifts, in the raised voice that came without warning, in the home that sometimes felt safe and sometimes did not, and in the work the child began to do, privately, constantly, of trying to figure out which kind of day it was going to be before anyone told them. Perhaps the home you grew up in was not dramatically unsafe. Perhaps there was love, real love, love you do not question, and still there was something that required reading. A parent who withdrew when they were struggling and left you in the silence of their absence, not understanding what you had done. A family where conflict was never named, only felt, where nothing was wrong but something was always slightly off. And you became very good at sensing that offset without ever being able to speak it. Or perhaps things were harder than that. Perhaps the unpredictability was sharper. Perhaps you learned very young that your role was to smooth, to soften, to anticipate, because the cost of getting it wrong was something you did not want to pay. Whatever the particular shape of your early world, something happened that is worth understanding. You developed a finely tuned emotional antenna. You learned to scan. You learned that other people's internal states were relevant information, important, even urgent information, and that part of your job was to track that information and respond to it. This was not a weakness. In the environment where it formed, it was genuinely adaptive. It kept you safe. It helped you navigate. It was, in its own way, an act of extraordinary intelligence by a small person trying to manage something that was too large for them. But the antenna, once calibrated, does not simply turn off when the environment changes. You grew. You left that room. You built a different life. And the antenna came with you, still scanning, still alert, still responding to signals that may or may not actually be there. The colleague who seems distracted in a meeting and the small, involuntary tightening of your chest. The friend who takes slightly too long to reply to a message, and the quiet spiral of wondering what you said. The partner whose energy feels different tonight, and the way your whole system goes to work before a word has passed between you. The antenna is doing what it was trained to do. It simply does not know that the war is over. What begins here in this understanding is not self-criticism. It is not the conclusion that you are broken, or that your sensitivity is a problem to be solved. What begins here is something more important. The recognition that this response, this chronic alertness, this constant absorption of everything around you, it has a story. It was built. And what was built can, with patience and honesty and time, be gently rebuilt. This brings us to something worth sitting with before we move on. The child who learned to read the room did so because they had to. They were doing the best possible thing with what they had. But somewhere along the way, that child became you, and you began to believe that this was simply who you are. Not a strategy, not a response, just you. And that belief, quietly and without announcement, became one of the things that holds you here. Let us now sit with what that belief built. Chapter 2. The identity shaped by what you absorbed when sensitivity becomes a survival strategy early enough. It does not stay at the surface. It goes all the way down. It becomes the lens through which you understand yourself, not just what you do, but who you are. And this is where things become more subtle and more important to look at with honesty. Perhaps you came to think of yourself as someone who simply cares more than other people. And in many ways this is true. You do feel deeply. You do hold the emotional reality of the people around you. You do notice what others miss. But caring deeply and being chronically responsible for how everyone around you feels are not the same thing, even though for a long time they may have felt indistinguishable. You began to locate your worth partly in your capacity to attune, to be the one who understood, the one who held the space, the one who made things better when they were difficult and kept them smooth when they threatened to become difficult, the sensitive one, the empathetic one, the one who always knew. And there is something quietly painful in admitting this because so much of that identity is genuinely beautiful. The capacity to feel deeply is a gift. The ability to hold someone else's pain without flinching is rare and precious. And yet, what happened to you in the process? What happened to your own needs, your own feelings, your own emotional weather, while you were so busy attending to everyone else's? Somewhere, gently and gradually, you began to disappear. Not all at once. Just in small, barely perceptible increments. The preference you didn't mention because the group had already decided. The feeling you didn't name because it wasn't the right time, and then the right time never came. The boundary you didn't draw because you couldn't bear to be the source of someone else's disappointment. And the self that absorbs everything also, in a particular way, becomes vulnerable to everything. When your sense of okayness is organized around other people's reactions, when you are well if they are well, When you are shaken if they are shaken, when a look, a tone, a slight withdrawal can alter the entire architecture of your inner experience, then you are not free. You are, in a very specific sense, tethered. Every person in your life holds a thread. And the world, with its constant flux of moods and projections and misunderstandings and simple human carelessness, pulls at those threads constantly. This is the particular burden of the person who learned too early to feel everything. It is not just that the world is hard. It is that the world gets all the way in, past the places you meant to protect, past the boundaries you tried to build, into the center of you, and rearranges things. A careless comment from someone who barely knows you can sit in your body for days. An atmosphere in a room that has nothing to do with you can color an entire afternoon. Someone else's bad mood can feel, inexplicably, but genuinely, like your responsibility to fix. What is being described here is not fragility, even though it can feel that way from the inside. What is being described is a self that never had the chance to become fully its own, because so much of its energy was turned outward, toward others, toward reading and managing and softening and absorbing, that there was simply not enough left to build a stable, rooted, deeply personal inner ground. The house was being kept tidy for everyone else, while the foundation went without attention. This matters because it means that the path forward is not about becoming less sensitive. It is not about caring less or feeling less. It is about building something, a center, a ground, a private interior that is genuinely yours, and that cannot be simply rearranged by the weather outside. That construction is what the rest of these chapters will begin to explore. Let us now look at what this unrooted sensitivity created in the territory of relationships. Chapter 3. The patterns that followed you there is a particular kind of relationship that people who absorb everything tend to find themselves in, not once, but again and again in slightly different forms, with slightly different people. It is the relationship where the emotional labor is distributed unevenly, where one person carries the temperature of the room and the other simply inhabits it. Where care flows primarily in one direction and the question of whether it might flow in the other is one that never quite gets asked, because asking feels too close to demanding, and demanding feels dangerous. Perhaps you have known this relationship. Perhaps you have known it in love, the partner who was brilliant and complicated and who needed you in ways that felt, for a time, like intimacy. The one whose moods became the organizing principle of the household, whose silences required interpretation, whose happiness became your project, whose pain you took on as your own even when it was not yours to carry. Perhaps you told yourself it was love, and perhaps it was. Love is not absent from these dynamics, but love and erosion can exist at the same time. A person can genuinely love you and still ask more of you than you were meant to give. Or perhaps the pattern appeared in friendship. The friend who called when everything was falling apart, but was somehow unavailable when things fell apart for you. The dynamic where you were the stable one, the wise one, the one who listened and held and did not require reciprocity, because reciprocity had, somewhere along the way, come to feel like a burden you had no right to place on anyone. The unspoken contract: I will be what you need, and in return, you will let me stay. Because staying, even in an uneven relationship, felt safer than the alternative. These patterns do not arrive because you made poor choices, or because something is wrong with you. They arrive because you were trained, deeply, bodily trained, for certain relational roles. The role of the one who accommodates, the one who smooths, the one who absorbs the other's difficult feelings without placing any equivalent difficulty on them in return. This training started long before you were old enough to question it, and it embedded itself not just in behavior, but in belief. In a deep, wordless conviction that this is simply how love works, that this is what you do if you care, that the measure of your love is the degree to which you can make yourself available and accommodating and endlessly patient. And so you entered relationships already disposed toward a certain arrangement. You found people who, consciously or not, were looking for exactly what you had been trained to offer. And the fit was, in the early days, often comfortable, familiar at least, which can feel like comfort even when it isn't. The dynamic settled, the pattern repeated. And somewhere underneath it all, something in you knew. Not a loud knowing, more like a slow, quiet accumulation of exhaustion, a growing sense that you were giving more than you were receiving, that your needs were somehow always slightly less urgent than everyone else's, that you had been disappearing, slowly, for a very long time. Recognizing these patterns does not require blaming the people in them. Most of them were simply responding to what they found, to someone who was extraordinarily good at giving and extraordinarily reluctant to ask for receiving. The pattern is not a verdict, it is an invitation. An invitation to understand what you were trained for and to ask honestly and without self-judgment, whether that training still serves who you are and who you are becoming. The relationships that follow from a rooted, boundaried, genuinely self-knowing place look different, not colder, not more defended, simply more honest, more reciprocal, built on the kind of ground that allows two people to actually meet, rather than one person perpetually holding the other up. Let us now look at where all of this has lived in the body. Chapter 4. What the body has been holding. There is a particular thing that happens when a feeling is not allowed to complete itself. When an emotion arises, as emotions do, as they are designed to do, and meets a moment that cannot hold it. Perhaps the moment was the wrong time. Perhaps the people present were not safe. Perhaps you had learned so early and so thoroughly that certain feelings were not welcome, not appropriate, not something you were allowed to simply have, that the feeling arrived and found no door, and so, not knowing what else to do, it went somewhere else, into the shoulders, into the jaw, into the chest, that particular tightening that lives just under the sternum and never quite resolves. Many people who live with chronic emotional reactivity also live with chronic physical tension. The body that is always slightly braced. The breath that tends to be shallow without any particular reason, as though the lungs are anticipating something difficult. The sleep that is never quite deep enough. The headaches that arrive after long social interactions. The way certain conversations leave you feeling physically drained rather than simply emotionally tired. The difference being that the drain goes all the way down into the cells, into the bones, in a way that sleep alone does not repair. This is not imagination, this is not weakness. This is the accumulated weight of years of unfelt feelings, not feelings that didn't happen, but feelings that happened and found nowhere to go. The grief of the childhood home that was never grieved, because who was there to grieve it with? The anger that was not allowed, that turned inward instead, and became self-criticism, self-doubt, the quiet ongoing narrative of not being quite enough, the fear that ran perpetually underneath everything else, that learned to disguise itself as hypervigilance, as the need to be constantly prepared, as the endless scanning for what might go wrong before it had a chance to go wrong. When you absorb everything around you, your nervous system works at a pace it was not designed to sustain indefinitely. It is, in essence, always somewhat activated, always tracking, always processing, always at least partially ready for a threat that may or may not materialize. A nervous system in that state is a nervous system that cannot fully rest. The muscles stay slightly contracted, the digestion is slightly off, the immune system is slightly compromised. The capacity for genuine pleasure, uncomplicated, unguarded, fully present pleasure, is slightly diminished, because part of you is always somewhere on watch. None of this is permanent. This is the important thing to hold here. The body is not a vault. The body is a communication system, and it is communicating, as it always has been, with extraordinary faithfulness. The tension, the shallow breath, the chronic fatigue, these are not punishments. They are messages. They are the body saying, there is something here that still needs attention. There is something here that was never allowed to complete. And the body, held with honesty and patience, and the kind of attention that is not clinical, but simply present, begins to release. Not all at once. Slowly, gradually, in the way that anything very deeply held begins to loosen when the conditions are finally right. The breath deepens. The shoulders drop, perhaps an inch, perhaps more. The place under the sternum softens. These are not small things. These are the body beginning to believe, for the first time in perhaps a very long time, that it is allowed to put something down. Let us now move into the beginning of that putting down. Chapter 5. The beginning of unchaining, There is a word that tends to come up in conversations about healing, and it is a word that can be easily misunderstood. The word is detachment. It is sometimes heard as coldness, as a withdrawal from feeling, a numbing, a decision to stop caring about what happens in the world around you. This is not what it means, and it is not what is being invited here. What is being invited is something more precise and more human than that. Imagine a tree in a storm. The branches move, genuinely move, sometimes dramatically. They bend, they sway, they are visibly affected by the wind. But the roots hold. The roots go deep enough that, no matter how the branches move, the tree does not fall. The tree is not unaffected by the storm. It would be absurd to suggest it is. But it is not destroyed by it either, because underneath the movement, underneath the very real response to what is happening, there is something stable, something that belongs entirely to the tree and cannot be taken by the wind. This is what it means to begin unchaining, not to become unbothered in the sense of unfeeling, but to become rooted in a way that means the weather outside, however fierce, cannot uproot you. The feeling still comes. Of course it comes. You are human, and feeling is what humans do. But the feeling moves through, the way weather moves through. It arrives, it peaks, it passes. It does not take up residence. It does not become the organizing principle of the next 3 days. It is real, and it is temporary. And somewhere in you, you know the difference. Building this kind of rootedness begins not with techniques or practices, but with an honest reckoning. It begins with sitting with the question, what exactly is mine? When something bothers you, when a comment lands in a way that stings, when a look from someone shifts the temperature of your inner world, when you wake with a heaviness that you cannot immediately source, the practice is not to immediately fix it or suppress it or spiral into it, but to pause gently and ask, is this mine? Is this genuinely about something in my own life, my own values, my own experience? Or is this something that belongs to someone else, something I have absorbed rather than encountered? This question, is this mine, is deceptively simple and remarkably powerful, because much of what people who absorb everything carry is not actually theirs. It is the residue of other people's moods, other people's unspoken tensions, other people's incomplete emotional processes that were, in a very real sense, projected outward and absorbed inward. The colleague who is short with you not because of anything you did, but because of a conversation they had before you arrived. The partner who is withdrawn not because you have failed them, but because they are navigating something private that has nothing to do with you. The parent whose criticism was never really about your specific choices, but about a fear they did not know how to articulate. None of this makes those experiences painless. But there is a difference, a felt, embodied difference, between pain that is genuinely yours and pain that you have taken on from elsewhere. The first kind deserves your full attention, your honest engagement, your willingness to sit with it and understand what it is asking of you. The second kind deserves something else, the quiet, compassionate recognition that you do not have to carry it, that you can set it down. Not with rejection or coldness, but with the same gentleness with which you might hand something back to its rightful owner. Unchaining also means, slowly and honestly, revisiting the places where you gave yourself away, the relationships where the current flows in one direction, the situations where your care is abundant and the care returned is thin, the habits of over-explanation, of preemptive apology, of making yourself smaller so that someone else might feel larger. These are not character flaws, they are old strategies. And old strategies, when the circumstances that required them no longer exist, can be gently set aside. This is not easy work. It requires a willingness to disappoint people, sometimes. To let a silence sit without rushing to fill it. To allow someone's discomfort without immediately moving to resolve it. To say what is true for you even when what is true for you is inconvenient for someone else. Each of these small moments of staying true is a root growing deeper, quietly, incrementally, building the ground that holds you. Let us now rest together in what becomes possible when that ground is stable. Chapter 6. What life feels like when nothing can reach all the way in there is a morning. When this work has taken hold, not all at once, not dramatically, but in the slow way of any genuine change, when you wake and notice something different. It is not the absence of feeling. The feelings are still there. If anything, they are more honest now, less tangled, more clearly their own shapes. But there is something else present too, a quality of spaciousness that was not there before. A sense that the day, whatever it holds, is something you will move through, rather than something that will move through you. Perhaps you have had moments of this already. A conversation that would once have unsettled you for hours that you noticed, processed, and then genuinely let go. A criticism that landed and stung, and then, instead of burrowing in and beginning its long residency in the chest, simply passed. A difficult mood in someone you love that you recognized as theirs, that you held with care, that you did not try to fix, that you did not take personally, and that you let be what it was. These moments, when they come, are not small. They are the evidence of something shifting. They are worth noticing. The life that becomes available on the other side of this unchaining is not, it must be said, a life without difficulty. The world does not become less complex. People do not become simpler. Relationships do not become frictionless. What changes is your relationship to all of it, the interior stance from which you meet what comes. The difference between being in the ocean and being on a boat. The difference between being carried by the current and being someone who can feel the current without being taken by it. What becomes possible, practically and tangibly, is the capacity to be genuinely present. This may seem like a small thing, but it is not. So much of the energy of the hypersensitive, emotionally reactive life goes toward what has already happened and what might happen next, the replaying of past conversations and the preparation for future ones, the management of other people's feelings and the anticipation of your own. The present, the actual texture of the actual moment, often goes unlived. People who stop carrying what is not theirs, who stop bracing for what has not arrived, who learn to let feelings move through rather than taking up residence. These people find that the present opens up in ways that are surprising and, frankly, a little overwhelming. There is so much here that was always here and that was missed. The relationships that grow from this rooted place have a different quality. They are honest in a way that earlier relationships perhaps could not be, because honesty requires a self that is stable enough to be known, and a self that is stable enough to receive the other's honesty without it becoming a threat. There is real meaning in these relationships, not the careful choreography of someone who is managing the other's responses, but the genuine encounter of two people who are actually present with each other. This is what intimacy is meant to be. Not the fusion of two people who have lost their edges, but the meeting of two people who are fully themselves. And there is something that begins to happen with regard to the things that used to reach all the way in. They begin to land differently. Not because you are defended against them. Defense was never the answer and will never be the answer, but because you now have ground underneath you, and ground changes everything. The comment that once would have rearranged your entire day now lands and is examined and is found to be about something other than the worst thing you feared it was about. The withdrawal that would once have triggered a spiral of self-questioning now invites a gentler response. Something is happening for them. I do not need to make it about me. The atmospheric tension in a room that would once have flooded your nervous system before you had crossed the threshold now registers as information rather than emergency. You feel it. You note it. You do not dissolve into it. This is freedom. Not the freedom of someone who does not feel. The freedom of someone who feels everything and is not destroyed by it. The freedom of someone who has built, through honesty and patience and genuine self-regard, a place inside themselves that belongs only to them. A place that the weather outside cannot reach, not because the weather is not real, not because you do not feel it, but because you have roots now, and the roots hold. Conclusion. Throughout these chapters, we have sat with something that deserves to be sat with, the full story of what it means to feel everything. to absorb everything, to have built an identity around attunement without ever quite building the ground beneath it. We began at the root, in the home, and the childhood that first calibrated your sensitivity. We traced how that sensitivity shaped not just your behavior, but your deepest beliefs about who you are and what love requires. We looked honestly at the relational patterns it created, the uneven distributions of care and labor and emotional responsibility that felt, for so long, like simply the shape of your life. We turned toward the body, toward what it has been holding in the silence between all those unfelt feelings. We began the work of unchaining, not through hardening, but through rooting. And we rested, finally, in the quiet truth of what becomes possible when nothing on the outside has the power to reach all the way in. I want to pause here and tell you about something before we close. Unchained Heart is a space built entirely for this journey, for the kind of healing that happens quietly, privately, in the in-between moments of ordinary life. There are many other audiobooks here, each one making its home in a different territory of the same emotional landscape you have been moving through today. If this has felt like something worth continuing, I want to invite you to subscribe and turn on notifications, so that you find your way back when the next one arrives. What does this mean for where you are right now? Perhaps you came here carrying something specific, a relationship that has taken more than it has given, a pattern you have been trying to name for a very long time, a body that has been quietly asking for attention that it has not received. Perhaps you came simply with the exhaustion of it all, the exhaustion of feeling everything, of absorbing everything, of being so endlessly, effortlessly permeable to a world that does not slow down to let you catch your breath. Whatever brought you here, something in these chapters has, I hope, offered some recognition, not a solution. Healing is not a solution, it is a direction, and directions are walked rather than arrived at all at once. But recognition. The particular relief of being told, I know this territory. I have walked here too. You are not alone, and you are not strange, and you are not too much. You are someone who felt everything and carried it far and is now, perhaps for the first time, beginning to understand that you were never meant to carry all of it. That some of what you have been holding belongs to the past, and the past, however long it took, is allowed to stay there. That some of what you have been absorbing belongs to other people, and other people, however much you love them, are allowed to carry their own weight. And some of what you have been afraid to feel, some of the tender, unguarded, genuinely vulnerable parts of yourself that learned very early to make themselves invisible, those parts are still here. They did not leave. They have been waiting, with remarkable patience, for the conditions to finally be safe enough to come forward. And the conditions are not perfect, and they never will be, and that is not what is required. What is required is simply this: a willingness to turn toward yourself with the same quality of attention and care that you have always so readily turned toward everyone else. You have carried this long enough, and you are not carrying it alone anymore.